Mo Howard or Larry Fine, because I knew they were still alive, and the operator said, well, we have several M. Howards, but only one Larry Fine.
For decades, the world laughed at the Three Stooges, unaware that behind the slapstick, Curly Howard was silently cracking. In his final days, Larry Fine disclosed the heartbreaking truth. Curly wasn't just overworked, he was crying out for help as his mind slipped away, and no one listened until it was too late. This is the story Columbia Pictures wanted buried. Curly Howard was the wild-hearted whirlwind of the trio, while Larry Fine served as the quiet, observant middleman caught between Mo's aggressive leadership and Curly's chaotic energy. On screen, they were the perfect comedy team. Off camera, Larry was witnessing something far more sinister, the slow destruction of his friend's mind and spirit. During the early days of the Three Stooges, before the fame and big paychecks, Larry often shared rooms with Mo and Curly. They lived close together, and nothing stayed hidden for long. Larry occupied a unique position as the observer between his two partners, and this vantage point allowed him to notice things that others missed. When the cameras rolled, Curly lit up the room with his infectious energy. But when the spotlight went dark, so did Curly. Larry began noticing a disturbing pattern. Curly would go completely quiet backstage, staring at walls for minutes at a time, completely unmoving. Sometimes he wouldn't even respond when someone called his name. This wasn't simple fatigue. It was as if something inside him had turned off entirely. Unlike Mo, who was vocal with statements and updates, Larry remained quiet and observant, but he was deeply affected by what he witnessed. He began keeping notes, writing down observations in his travel journals, and jotting thoughts on the backs of scripts. Some of those pages survived, and they tell a painful story of a man slipping away while still right in front of us. Larry didn't have terms like dementia or neurological illness to describe what he was seeing. These conditions weren't widely understood in the 1940s, but he knew something was fundamentally wrong. Curly started having emotional outbursts between takes. One minute he'd be laughing with the crew, the next he'd be tearing up and walking off set without a word. Larry was often the one who followed Curly during these episodes. He'd sit next to him while Curly held his head in his hands, mumbling that he wasn't getting it right anymore. Larry would reassure him, telling him he was doing great, but deep down, he was terrified. He told a close friend years later that the Curly fans adored on screen had already begun to disappear before the first stroke ever hit. Curly began forgetting entire routines he himself had created. His once playful outbursts now came with flashes of confusion and anger. There were days when Curly wouldn't show up to the set, and no one could find him. The situation was becoming impossible to ignore. Behind closed doors, Larry and Mo had a private conversation they rarely mentioned afterward. Mo was pacing the dressing room, almost panicked. He told Larry he didn't think Curly could keep going. They agreed their friend needed a break, but Columbia Pictures had other plans. When they asked to pause production or rest Curly for a few months, the studio's answer was brutally clear. No, if Curly couldn't perform, he'd be replaced. Just like that. Larry never got over that moment. He later said that was the day he realized the act had become a business first and a brotherhood second. They weren't a team anymore. They were products, and Curly was the main attraction. What happened on stage during Halfwit's holiday in 1946 would confirm every fear Larry had been carrying. The collapse on set was supposed to be another routine short, but Larry said something felt wrong from the moment they arrived. Curly looked distant, barely spoke, and his eyes didn't focus properly. The crew joked that he must have had a late night, but Larry wasn't laughing. Larry pulled Mo aside and said flat out, "Curly isn't right." Mo agreed, but the show had to go on. Everyone brushed off the warnings except Larry. Just before cameras rolled, Curly sat slumped in a chair, mumbling his lines under his breath, but the words weren't coming out right. Larry watched him try 3 times just to remember a single phrase. Then, during filming, it happened. In the middle of a scene, Curly froze. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face contorted, and suddenly he collapsed. The set went still. Mo rushed over, but Larry just stood there, frozen, because he'd seen this coming. He had warned them, and now it was too late. That stroke would end Curly's career and, in many ways, his life. But what Larry told later was even more disturbing. He said Curly had shown signs of minor strokes before that moment. Slurred speech, muscle twitches, and emotional swings. Larry believed that day on set wasn't just a medical emergency. It was the final breaking point of years of neglect, the moment when Curly's body finally gave up after months of being pushed past its limit. After Curly's stroke, the spotlight moved on, but Larry couldn't. On paper, the Three Stooges rolled forward. Shemp stepped in, the shorts kept coming, and Columbia Pictures pretended nothing had changed. But something vital had been ripped out of the group, and Larry Fine felt it more than anyone. For the world, it was business as usual. For Larry, it was a slow collapse. Crew members would later say Larry seemed haunted. He went through the motions, delivered his lines, took the hits, and gave the laughs. But the energy was different. One assistant remembered seeing Larry backstage after filming a particularly intense scene with Mo. He was sitting alone, wiping his face, saying he should have never come in that day. He should have stayed home. Larry said the show never felt right again. Even with Shemp, even with the laughs, the rhythm had shifted. He started seeing comedy differently. The bits they once loved, the slaps, the pies, the stumbles, felt colder now. That truth hit Larry harder than he expected, and it stayed with him. In the years following Curly's collapse, Larry Fine became increasingly withdrawn. Behind closed doors, he started opening up to close friends and family. Larry admitted that Curly had begged for rest more than once. In the late 1960s, as Larry's own health began to decline, he gave more detailed accounts to writers working on books about the Stooges. In one taped conversation, Larry described Curly's final performances as torture behind a laugh track. He didn't just blame the studio anymore, he blamed himself. Larry confessed that Curly had been overwhelmed from the start. The fame, the pressure, and the physical toll, he wasn't built for it. He didn't like crowds, he didn't like the business side, he just liked to make people happy. Larry disclosed. When that joy started to fade, no one gave him space to breathe. Columbia Pictures pushed them relentlessly. The demand for new content was constant. Even when Curly was missing lines and slurring words, they filmed around it, changed the angles, shortened his scenes, but they never stopped. Larry knew the fans would keep watching. The laughs would never stop, but he wanted people to understand what it cost, because behind every spin, there was a man slowly being torn apart. The final time Larry spoke about Curly wasn't in front of a camera or on a stage. It was in a quiet hospital room, surrounded by faded memories. He didn't make a speech or try to explain away the years of silence. He just held on to an old photograph and whispered Curly's name like it was a prayer. A few days later, Larry suffered a massive stroke of his own, the same kind of devastating blow that had taken Curly off the stage nearly 30 years before. Nurses said he lost much of his speech, and by the end, he could barely move his left side. The man who once danced between eye pokes and pratfalls now sat frozen, trapped inside a failing body just like Curly had been. Larry Fine died in January 1975. By then, the world had changed. The original Stooges were gone, but the reruns lived on. Children still laughed at the chaos. Adults still remembered the punchlines, but the tragedy behind the trio stayed buried until Larry broke his silence.
Hey, Sergeant, you want some of this new Cool Whip topping?
Later, pile. I'm getting in shape in case our Cool Whip contest winner's a girl. Anybody can win a trip to Hollywood and a guest appearance on the show.
For 50 years, Frank Sutton kept his mouth shut about the dark truth behind Gomer Pyle, the man who made millions laugh as the explosive Sergeant Carter was actually dying inside, trapped by his own success and desperate to break free. Behind that famous red face and booming voice was a classically trained actor who felt like a prisoner in his own hit show. Today, we're finally revealing the shocking secrets Frank Sutton never wanted you to know, and the truth about what really happened on the Gomer Pyle set will change how you see this beloved show forever. For 5 seasons, Frank Sutton brought Sergeant Vince Carter to life with incredible energy. Every week, millions of viewers watched him yell at Gomer Pyle, his face turning red with frustration. But here's what most people didn't know. Frank Sutton was nothing like his character in real life. Before Gomer Pyle, Sutton was a serious dramatic actor. He graduated with honors from Columbia University, where he studied theater. He even appeared in the Academy Award-winning film Marty in 1955. This wasn't just some guy who stumbled into comedy. He was a trained professional who took his craft seriously. But when he got cast as Sergeant Carter in 1964, everything changed. Suddenly, this classically trained actor had to spend his days shouting and sweating under hot studio lights. And while he did it brilliantly, it wasn't easy. What made his performance even more authentic was his real military background. Sutton had tried to join the Marines during World War II, but was rejected due to color blindness. Instead, he served in the Army and saw combat in the South Pacific. He knew how real soldiers acted, which is why his portrayal felt so genuine. Here's where things get shocking. As the show became more popular, Sutton started feeling trapped. People on the street would yell at him, expecting him to act like Sergeant Carter in real life. They wanted him to be loud and aggressive. But that wasn't who he was. In a rare 1970s interview, Sutton admitted something that might surprise you. He said, "I'm proud of the show. I just wish there was room for Carter to grow." This was his way of saying he wanted to do more than just yell and shout every episode. The problem was simple. The network executives weren't interested in change. They had a formula that worked. Carter yells, Gomer smiles, audience laughs. They didn't want to mess with success, even if it meant keeping a talented actor stuck in the same role. Multiple sources who worked with Sutton revealed that he would often come in early to suggest different ways to play scenes. He wanted to show more humanity in Sergeant Carter, more depth, but these ideas were usually ignored. The producers wanted punchlines, not character development. Now, let's talk about something that might shock you even more. The relationship between Frank Sutton and Jim Nabors wasn't as close as fans believed. While they had great chemistry on screen, their real-life relationship was more professional than personal. Sutton and Nabors came from completely different backgrounds. Sutton was a disciplined, classically trained actor who prepared intensively for every scene. Nabors, on the other hand, was more relaxed and improvisational. He came from variety shows and relied on his natural charisma. This created an interesting dynamic on set. Sutton would memorize every line perfectly and expect the same from everyone else. If someone messed up during rehearsal, he would stop and reset. Nabors was more laid back about mistakes. Director Kobe Ruskin, who worked on many episodes, later revealed Frank was a perfectionist. If someone flubbed a line, even in rehearsal, he'd stop and reset. Jim Nabors was more relaxed. That sometimes created a push-pull dynamic. But here's the thing. This tension actually made the show better. Their different approaches created the perfect balance that made their on-screen chemistry so compelling. By the final seasons, cracks were starting to show. Both Sutton and Nabors were getting tired of the same routine. For Sutton, the strain was becoming visible. He wasn't phoning it in, but the spark that once defined Sergeant Carter was starting to feel mechanical. Writer Everett Greenberg revealed in a 1969 interview, Frank was a gifted actor with range. He could do drama, Shakespeare, anything. But by the final season, he was just yelling a lot, and he hated that. The supporting cast started noticing changes too, where once the mood on set had been light and collaborative, it became quieter and more like a regular job. The magic was fading. Sutton began clashing more with writers and producers. He desperately wanted Sergeant Carter to evolve, maybe show some vulnerability, or explore life outside the Marine base. But CBS executives weren't interested. They knew the formula worked, and they weren't going to change it. The final season in 1969 was marked by shorter storylines and less creative energy. Jim Nabors made the decision to leave, telling the Los Angeles Times, "I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to wear a private's uniform forever." But what about Frank Sutton? Unlike Nabors, who could transition into variety shows and music, Sutton found himself typecast. Casting directors couldn't see him as anything other than the red-faced drill sergeant. His son Joe Sutton later revealed, "Dad was a trooper. I guess he just hated being stuck." After a while, he had more to say than he was given credit for. Tragically, Sutton never got the chance to redefine himself. He died suddenly in 1974, just 5 years after the show ended. He was only 50 years old. Here's something that would probably shock Frank Sutton today. In 2025, there was a huge controversy when MeTV dropped Gomer Pyle from its primetime schedule. Fans were outraged, flooding social media with complaints. The backlash was so intense that another network, Catchy Comedy, aired a 24-hour Gomer Pyle marathon. It was hugely successful, proving that Sutton's legacy still matters to people today. But this controversy highlighted a bigger problem. Actors like Frank Sutton, who gave everything to their roles, often don't get the recognition they deserve. Unlike other TV legends, Sutton didn't write a memoir or live long enough for reunion specials. His story was incomplete. What makes Frank Sutton's story so compelling is that he never publicly complained about being typecast. He remained professional throughout his career, even when he was clearly frustrated. He appreciated the success and the fan mail, but he also feared being forever stuck as Sergeant Carter. In private conversations with friends, Sutton would express his desire to return to theater and dramatic roles. He wanted to stretch himself as an actor, to take on parts that didn't require a military uniform and constant shouting. But he also understood the responsibility that came with being part of something beloved. He knew that millions of people found joy in his performance, and he never wanted to take that away from them. So what's the shocking truth about Frank Sutton and the Gomer Pyle set? It's that behind the loud, explosive character was a thoughtful, dedicated actor who felt trapped by his own success. He wanted to grow as a performer, but the system wouldn't let him. The real tragedy isn't that he was typecast. It's that we lost him before he could show us what else he was capable of. Frank Sutton gave us one of television's most memorable characters, but he sacrificed his own artistic dreams to do it. His story reminds us that even in the golden age of television, success came with a price. The man who made us laugh every week was quietly struggling with his own professional limitations. Today, as we watch those classic episodes, we can appreciate not just the comedy, but the skill and dedication of a man who gave everything to his craft. Frank Sutton may have felt trapped by Sergeant Carter, but he created something truly special. A character that still makes people laugh more than 50 years later. That's the real legacy of Frank Sutton. Not just the laughs, but the reminder that great performances often come from great sacrifice.
The tragic death of 6-year-old beauty queen JonBenet Ramsey shocked the world and haunted investigators for decades. But now, with the help of groundbreaking DNA technology, the mystery may finally be solved.
After nearly 3 decades of mystery, the JonBenet Ramsey case is on the brink of a stunning breakthrough, thanks to modern-day DNA technology and a renewed police effort. Surprising new declarations, untested evidence, and a 70% chance of identifying the killer have shifted the spotlight away from the family and onto a long-ignored intruder theory. The truth may finally explode into the open, and it's not what anyone expected. The 6-year-old beauty queen was found dead on December 26, 1996, in the basement of her family's Colorado home. She was discovered with a garrote embedded in her neck, and an autopsy declared a fracture in her skull. A ransom note left behind demanded $118,000 for her return, but her body was in the basement all along. The crime scene was contaminated from the start. Patsy Ramsey found the ransom note on the stairs Christmas morning. John Ramsey discovered his daughter's body in the basement hours later, carrying her upstairs in tears. Police had looked for her for several hours before her father made the devastating discovery. The lack of forced entry signs, combined with the ransom note written on home stationery that referenced John's exact bonus amount, immediately cast suspicion on the family. The investigation was plagued with critical missteps. The crime scene was poorly secured, with family members, friends, and detectives moving freely through the house. They washed surfaces, touched evidence, and even relocated JonBenet's body, severely compromising forensic evidence integrity. Police initially missed the basement where JonBenet was found. They failed to bring in crime scene dogs or promptly seal off the entire property. The incident occurred during Christmas with understaffed departments, creating what former police chief Mark Beckner admitted was mishandling that set the investigation on the wrong path. The breakthrough came in 2003 when investigators extracted mixed male DNA from JonBenet's underwear. This DNA didn't match any Ramsey family member and was submitted to the FBI's CODIS database. The 2008 exoneration of the family was publicly supported by Boulder's district attorney, reinforced by these DNA findings. Unknown male DNA traces were discovered on multiple items, including the garrote, a blanket under her fingernails, and the wrist cord, suggesting the killer's bodily contact with the crime scene. Modern forensic genetic genealogy represents the major leap forward. This technique combines DNA profiling with consumer genealogy databases, the same method that identified the Golden State Killer in 2018. According to John Ramsey, genealogical DNA can yield a 60 to 70% probability of identifying the perpetrator. In January 2025, John Ramsey met with Boulder Police Chief Stephen Redfern and a genetic genealogy expert for approximately 90 minutes. They discussed applying these technologies to retest crime scene items. Chief Redfern and other officials have expressed openness to collaborate with the FBI and independent labs, showing commitment to solving the case despite the years that have passed. John Ramsey has repeatedly recommended that police retest important evidence like the ransom note, garrote, flashlight, and underwear using the latest labs that can generate genealogy-ready profiles. Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's brother, made headlines by participating in his first public interview on Dr. Phil after nearly 3 decades in silence. When asked why he decided to finally speak, Burke replied, "If the story is going to be told, I want to tell it. I don't want people talking about me. I would rather tell my own story."